preparing to go live. I'm going to check it. All right. Preparing to go live. All right. Check it. All right. So I want to introduce our guest tonight, Laura Yetter with Legal Services of Alabama. And she has an extensive knowledge on fines, fees, and court costs in Alabama. And her presentation will cover the cost of criminal convictions and the impact of these costs on indigent criminal defendants. And she's a native of Louisville, Kentucky, and works as a court debt attorney for Legal Services of Alabama. And in her capacity as the court debt attorney, Ms. Yetter works with criminal defendants who are unable to pay the fines and fees stemming from their criminal convictions. Before coming to Legal Services, Ms. Yetter clerked for the Honorable Judge Hughey in Jefferson County Circuit Court. And I wanted to welcome you, Laura, to our group tonight. And this is the Voter Rights Restoration team with the League of Women Voters of Alabama. And just some background for you is what we do is we have a social media campaign where we're helping people who want to get their rights restored. And that's been ongoing during this pandemic, but also each local league has a voter rights restoration project where they, as a part of their voter drives, we help people get their rights restored. And one of the things that we consistently had questions about are the fines and fees, and trying to understand that, because to me, it's very confusing. And I think what you've got to share with us is really going to help us understand it better. And just wanted to tell everybody that, I guess, ask you, Laura, how you want to handle questions. And if you'd like them to hold it or talk or raise their hand or whatever.
Generally after the presentation, I reserve a few minutes for questions. And then if there are any additional questions beyond that, people can feel free to email me to follow up with any other questions. As part of my presentation, I need to share the screen.
All right, hold a minute. We'll share it with you. Okay.
Okay. And I just want to make sure that everybody can see this pretty clearly. Is everybody able to see that? Okay.
I can see it.
Okay, great. Let me try to get rid of this. Okay, well, thank you for the very nice introduction, Kathy. I appreciate it. As she was saying, I work as a court debt attorney with Legal Services, and in my capacity in that position, I help criminal defendants that are unable to pay their court costs, fines, and fees. As Kathy was saying, I'm sure you guys have kind of run into this issue a lot with the work that you're doing, especially with kind of the new rulings that have come down, I believe in September, that said that you must pay your court debt in order to be able to restore your voting rights, which is a bummer. But that being said, we'll launch right into the presentation. So I want to start out by explaining what court debt is to you all. In the context of this presentation, like I said before, I'm talking about criminal court debt. So court debt that results from criminal convictions, whether it be traffic tickets, because traffic tickets are considered criminal matters in Alabama, misdemeanors, felonies, or juvenile offenses. What I'm not talking about are civil judgments, which are default judgments or child support, things like that. So in the context of what I'm talking about, there are 4 general types of court debt. The first is fines, which are financial punishments. This is your punishment for doing something wrong. You did something wrong, you have to pay for it. The second type are court costs. And this is essentially the fees that a court charges a criminal defendant for use of its resources. And when you hear the term court costs, you might think that these court costs are used to fund judicial entities, but that's not always the case because court costs can also go towards funding non-judicial entities. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Third, we have third-party fees, and these are fees that a court ordered you to pay to third parties. You always know you're paying a third-party fee if you're paying someone other than the court. So you're paying your court debt somewhere other than the courthouse. And this can be supervision fees, probation supervision fees, drug fees, or maybe the court ordered you to take some classes like anger management or something that costs money. Finally, we have restitution, and this is imposed on criminal defendants to compensate the victim of a crime for their financial loss or damage. So in order to make this make a little bit more sense to people, I like to use hypotheticals. So let's say that I get into an argument with my friend and I break her phone. I'm charged with criminal mischief, which is a Class A misdemeanor. So when this is the case, the court can impose a fine of up to $6,000. In my case, let's say the court imposes a fine of $1,000. So in addition to the fine, I'll also be charged court costs. And let's say in this case, it's $772 in court costs. These are things like docket fees, subpoena fees, things like this. But what you'll also note is that there are attorney's fees. So let's say that when I went to trial, I was unable to afford an attorney, and so they appointed an attorney to me. What people don't often realize is that it's very, very common for courts to pass on the cost of that attorney that they appointed to me. So let's say the attorney that was appointed to represent me said that they did $553 of work. So they'll pass that cost on to me, and that will be part of my court costs that I owe the court. In addition, I broke my friend's phone. I have to pay her back. So let's say it's $550 for that phone. I think phones are pretty expensive now. So I think it could, be substantially higher if it were an iPhone or something like that. So then let's say in addition to all of those things, I'm charged third-party fees. The court puts me on probation for a year. Probation supervision fees at the state level are $40 a month. So that's $480 a year. And another condition of my probation is that I'm being drug tested. Here, the total for drug test is $144. That is very, very low to what it actually would be. That figure is calculated on if I got drug tested once a month, and the drug test was $12. Drug testing is random, so it's when your color comes up. So who knows how many times a month I could be drug tested. And they're usually $25 a drug test now. So that would be substantially higher than what's actually included in this hypothetical. So all in all, for breaking my friend's $550 phone, I now owe the court $2,946 for that case. Let's say that, put it into context, I had an appointed attorney. We can say that I'm indigent. And so I'm able to keep up with my third-party fees. I'm paying my supervision fees monthly. I'm paying for my drug tests, but I'm not actually making payments to the court. So if I miss 3 payments to the court, it will be passed on to the DA for collections. And when that happens, the DA will take this number, $2,946, will take 30% of that number and add it on to my total. So when that happens, it will be $651.60 for missing 3 payments. They call it interest. And so now I owe $3,509 for breaking my friend's phone. And this is pretty common. This is not an extraordinary example. It's not, meant to shock. This is an everyday situation of what someone can owe in a case like this. So I also want to move on to traffic offenses, because traffic offenses are a really big deal in Alabama. I have a lot of clients that traffic offenses have really impacted their life in a really negative way. So I kind of wanted to show you what these traffic offenses might look like depending on where you are in the state. So for this hypothetical, let's say that I was pulled over and later convicted of running a red light and having no insurance. So what does this look like in 3 different municipal courts? And I chose these municipal courts just randomly because they had their court cost information online. I'm not sure all 3 of these courts still do. I think I might have had to call Huntsville up to ask what theirs was. But that's just to say that these are kind of random examples. So as you'll see in every court, the fines are the same, $20 for running a red light, $50 for no insurance. However, the court costs are different. So in Huntsville, it's $315. In Montgomery, it's $310. And in Decatur, it's $390. So when you look at these different courts, and you're probably thinking 2 things. The first being, why are court costs so expensive? You know, they are substantially more expensive than the fines imposed. And number 2, why are these court costs different? In order to help explain this, we can focus on Huntsville. So the answer to the first question, why are they so expensive, is that you're paying a lot of people when you pay court costs. And this is where a breakdown of where the money goes. I'm not going to read them all to you, but I'll just talk about a few. The first that I'd like to talk about is the Fair Trial Tax Fund. This is $16 from every municipal court case. And that goes into a fund to pay for appointed attorneys, court reporters, things like that. Additionally, there is a Citizenship Trust Fund, which is a trust fund set up to fund the American Village of Montevallo. I don't know if anyone knows what that is, but it's essentially a theme park that charges admission. And it's $1 of every municipal court case now, but it used to be more. It was gradually reduced. The third thing I'd like to talk about, which answers the second question, why are these court costs different, is the final bar, which are the local laws. And this is the amount of local legislation that has been passed that increases court costs. And so these things can be directed towards things like law libraries, maybe like new sheriff's departments, or they might go back to the municipal court in some capacity. It really depends on what local laws have been passed to allocate money to where. So additionally, I would like to point out that court costs are very expensive, obviously, but to put this in even more context, although municipal courts are a part of the Alabama Unified Judicial System, the state does not fund municipal courts at all. Instead, municipal courts fund the state. So as you can see here, which is sort of like a kind of an approximation of where these things go, the municipal court system actually retains a very small amount of the court costs imposed, while the state gets its fair share and other entities as well. So kind of to put this into perspective, depending on where you are, you're going to pay different amounts for the same traffic tickets. So $380 in Montgomery, $460 in Decatur. So focusing on Decatur, let's say you're charged $460 and you can't afford to pay that at one time. What the court will do is it will likely put you on a payment plan. So let's say that it puts me on a payment plan for $25 a month. If I'm on this payment plan, in order to pay off this ticket, it will take me 1 year and 7 months. And this just kind of puts things into perspective about Decatur and Alabama in general. I think we're all aware that Alabama is a pretty impoverished state overall. And as you can see in Decatur, the poverty rate is much higher than the national average poverty rate. So this is a very real issue affecting people in Decatur and everywhere, you know, because Decatur is not the only city or place with the high poverty rate here. And so let's say I'm on this payment plan for 1 year and 7 months. If and only if I'm only to make, if and only if I'm only able to make that $25 per month payment plan, it'll be 1 year and 7 months. But say something comes up and I can't make that payment that month, then it can actually be longer, which is generally the case. And so let's just say it's 2 years. For 2 years of my life, as long as I'm not able to pay that, the court can set random review hearings, which makes me go to court. I'm in a courtroom full of people that are in the same situation as me, and we have to explain to the court why we're not able to make payments on our payment plan. These review hearings can be really stressful for people that are in that position, and also very embarrassing to kind of go up there and talk about your financial difficulties. It's not something I think most people are comfortable with. If you miss a review hearing, they will issue a warrant for your arrest. So it's really important that people actually attend these hearings, even though, you know, it can take up your entire day and it's an uncomfortable and embarrassing experience for a lot of people. So to kind of transition to what criminal defendants can do in order to help them with court debt, there are several steps that they can take. Before I kind of get into this, I'd like to let you guys know from the legal side that even though based on the ruling that you have to pay your court debt in order to vote, that is a separate issue from what I'm about to talk about. And that is, a court cannot incarcerate a criminal defendant solely for being too poor to pay their court debt. But it still happens all the time, all over Alabama. And when a court incarcerates someone solely for being too poor to pay, that court risks violating that person's constitutional rights, specifically the equal protection rights under the 14th Amendment. So there are protections to keep people from being incarcerated if they're too poor to pay. But in several courts across the state, especially municipal court, there's not a lot of watchdogs or anybody to tell people what's going on. So it does happen, not as regularly as it used to, but I wouldn't say that it's uncommon. So what can criminal defendants do in order to avoid these things happening and to avoid their court debt being increased? Like I was talking about, that 30% increase in interest, is don't miss court. And that kind of relates to the last example I was using, where even though you're going to be in front of the court for 1 year and 7 months or 2 years, you have to go to court. If you don't, if you miss a court date, and even if you can't pay, the court has the ability to suspend your driver's license. And this makes it incredibly difficult for a lot of criminal defendants because in order to pay their court debt, they need their car to drive to work and to drive to the courthouse and just to run basic errands. If they miss court, they can also pick up new charges. Some municipalities have enacted failure to appear as new charges, and they can be like $300, $400 that gets added on to the court debt that you already owe. So it can be very stressful for these people. And then finally, we have warrants. You know, if you don't appear, the court's going to issue a warrant for your arrest, and then you have that hanging over your head until you can resolve that. And a lot of courts are not going to let you resolve the warrants until you can pay them in full, unless you use a bail bondsman. So that actually makes things even more difficult on these criminal defendants that are subject to these review hearings. Secondly, this is communicate with the court about your ability to pay. And this, this is more towards criminal defendants, not necessarily what you guys are interested in, but this is just advice to help them try to minimize or mitigate increases to their actual court debt. And then, as you saw from my graph showing where court costs go, the state of Alabama the judicial system in Alabama is not as well funded as many people involved in the judicial system would like it to be. And so everyone is kind of fighting for their piece of the funding that they need because there's just a lack of it. So when criminal defendants are asking for their court debt to be lowered, it's really important that they bring proof to the court, because courts are just going to be resistant by the nature of like the funding that they need. So we also have keep your own records. And this would be great for you guys too. I know you guys make spreadsheets and do things like that, but it is not uncommon for a court. Well, it's not unheard of. I would say it is uncommon, but it's not unheard of for a court to make clerical errors. So I would advise people to get the original sentencing order and see how much court costs they're charged, fines and fees. And this is more so in the municipal court. I wouldn't necessarily worry about this in circuit courts, in state circuit courts or district courts. But keep your sentencing order and keep your receipts. And finally, make sure the court has your contact info and address, because as part of the review hearings that the court holds, and when you owe them money, say you move and don't tell them, they send it to your address, you miss it, and now you have a warrant, or your driver's license is suspended, or you have a new charge that you have to answer for. And finally, this is just advice that actually might help some of the people you're working with, is if they are still on probation, is they're able to ask for their probation or supervision fees and drug test fees to be waived. And this might enable them to actually put money towards the court debt that they owe, that they're trying to lower in order to be able to restore the right to vote. As you also saw in traffic ticket cases, what courts often do is they will assess court costs on each traffic ticket, even if you get them from the same stop. You can ask that they not do this, but it is pretty common that they're going to do this. And if a defendant asks them not to do this, it's important that they bring proof. So this is just kind of a very brief overview and introduction to court costs and how they affect people. But court costs are kind of an unspoken and below the radar issue that every criminal defendant in the state has to deal with. There's another one that I hadn't talked about that I came across kind of recently, and that's kind of shocking. And that is, if you are convicted and you're placed in jail, what a court can do is charge you for every day that you're in jail for housing and maintenance fees. And this can be, I believe, up to $25 a day. So if you're in jail for a year, that's a pretty substantial amount that you owe. And so on top of that, let's say you get charged the interest. And what generally tends to happen is, not generally, I won't say generally, but it's common for it to happen is that criminal defendants kind of develop a sense of hopelessness, where they have this mountain of debt and it seems like there's no way out of it. And so that causes a lot of people just to kind of give up. Say they have traffic tickets, they have their license suspended, they have to get to work, they'll keep driving and just keep piling up tickets and warrants and things like that. So this is definitely something that affects people all over the state, and it's really difficult for these criminal defendants that are in this position. And with that, I think I moved through this pretty quickly. I think a little more quickly than I'm used to, but I can also open the floor to questions if anybody has them. I can stop sharing my screen.
Well, that's a sobering presentation, Laura. I guess it's but there's so many things that I learned. I know Legal Services of Alabama, you guys have a lot of, you're dealing with a lot of issues that are.
Well, this is a new grant. So this is a 3-year grant that's funded by Southern Poverty Law Center. So it just kind of got off the ground about 1.5 years ago. So I think we have 1.5 years left to work on this issue. I think it's something that Legal Services is trying to do more of, but I don't know of any other attorneys in the state that focus on these issues. Public defenders and appointed attorneys generally kind of drop off after kind of the criminal matters. They don't really have the capacity to stick around for the court debt issues that result.
So it sounds like then each county, each municipality and district circuit court, they have their own fee structure that you can't predict.
Not necessarily, just in terms of local laws. Generally it's pretty uniform, except for those increased local laws. Some, like there's a suggested for traffic tickets, a list of suggested fines, but courts aren't necessarily limited to those suggested fines.
Does anyone else have questions?
Yeah, I've got two questions, Laura. The first one is the third-party fees. Are they paid through the court, or are they paid directly to third parties? Because some of the people we've talked to, they're kind of confused already about what the money's going to and how to distribute the money. And then the second part of that is, we try to focus on the things that will restore their voting rights, but is there a better way? I mean, there's certain ways that should handle the debt to make sure it doesn't get worse. I mean, as much as we'd like them to have their voting rights back, if they pay for certain things and other things result in additional fees and fines, it could be counterproductive. So
yeah, that's a great question. For the supervision fees and things like that, if you're working with people that are able to pay those, but they're not actually paying the court, then you're able to have those waived. And like I said, you're paying third party fees when you're paying someone other than the court. So every time you go to meet your probation officer, generally people are paying them their monthly supervision fee, or every time someone takes a drug test, they're paying that money for the drug test. If they're not able to afford that and their court debt, they can ask for those supervision fees and drug tests to be waived, but they are going to need proof of their indigency in order to show that and to have a realistic chance of having that waived. And once those things are waived and they're more able to put money towards their court debt, they're at less risk of developing that interest, the 30% interest, and to actually get that underlying court down.
I've got a question. How is it if the case law has said that you are entitled to an attorney in a criminal manner, and if you can't pay for one, the court must provide you? How can they turn around and charge you? Because if you could pay for the attorney, you would have some control over who you got.
I appreciate the confusion there. Yeah, it's pretty surprising for people when they find that out. Under the law, it's loosely worded, I would say, that is this person able to, or will they be able to afford an attorney? So a lot of times courts are hoping that these criminal defendants are going to at one point be able to pay the costs of the attorney that they appointed them. But it is.
So it is illegal if somebody goes to court. I have a second question. For something like a traffic ticket that they really cannot pay, and the court says, well, we're going to stick you in jail.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question too. So let's say I drive to court in my Mercedes-Benz with my Louis Vuitton purse and tell them I cannot afford to pay this court debt because I just don't want to. They can totally put me in jail for that because I have the money, I just don't want to pay them. But let's say I actually don't have the funds and I go to court, and the only reason that I'm not meeting my sentence, which is paying these fines and fees, is because I'm unable to. They're not able to arrest me solely because I'm unable to. If it's willful non-payment, they can, but if it's through no fault of my own, I'm too poor, they can't. They're not supposed to.
Yeah, I think the emphasis is they're not supposed to. If they can get away with it, they will.
I mean, it was kind of, I think before this issue was brought up, I think it was pretty common for courts, just because I don't think a lot of people knew necessarily that you weren't able to do that. So I think courts were kind of thinking, okay, well, you can sit your time out for $24 a day. But that's not necessarily legal unless, you know, the person is willfully non-paying.
Artist, you had a question? You're on mute. You need to come off mute. Artist, you need to come off of mute.
Can you hear me now? No?
I can hear you.
Oh, you can?
Yeah.
Laura, is it part of your responsibilities with legal services to also, is there any division of legal services monitoring the equal enforcement of traffic fines among different ethnic and economic social groups? Because I can say from personal experience, only 2 municipalities, Orange Beach, Alabama, and Gulf Shores, Alabama, personal experiences where I have seen municipal judges throw away tickets for people they knew, and then other people that are poor, they don't have the same type of thing. Is there any watchdog activity going on trying to monitor, or would that have to be something that comes from the city, or would it have to come from, I mean, do you know of any, because I know it happens all day, every day, which is another part of the problem, that we're picking on poorer people that can't afford lawyers, and they're not friends with the judge.
It does happen. You're very right about that. There's no watchdog group that I know of. Municipal courts are largely unregulated by people. Not a lot of people are in municipal courts and seeing what's going on. So, but not to my knowledge, there's no groups tracking this.
Okay.
I'm Sue Carney. I don't have my photo up here, but I have a question. When you go into court, does the court know what your financial status is prior to you coming there? And then I have a second question too.
When they assess fines and fees, courts are generally kind of supposed to ask people about their financial situation in order to tailor the fines and fees to that, or not fees, but the fines specifically to that defendant. But I think with the sheer magnitude of cases that are in front of these courts, that doesn't happen very often.
Okay, and secondly, on the local laws, are those laws that are just, I mean, who makes, this is a really stupid question, who makes those laws? I mean, are they things that are like voted on in local elections? Are they things done by city councils or county commissioners, or where do they come from?
That's actually a great question. And it's something that I am not totally clear on. I think that in order to have local legislation passed, it has to go to the state legislature. I'm not totally sure if that's true, but I'm not sure if like a municipality or a county can pass it just on their own. I'm not, like I said, not 100% sure on that. It might have to go to the state legislature that votes on it at large.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
All right.
I have a question.
All right, Stephanie.
So Laura, you said that they can ask for supervision and drug test fees to be waived. So if I said that to somebody who is, years past their sentencing and dealing with this, and just trying to pay as much as they can, and they look at me and they're like, okay, that's cute, lady. How do I do that? What do we tell them?
That's a very realistic response. Really so as long as they're still paying the probation and supervision fees, they're able to have them waived. And what I would suggest that they do is speak to their probation officer about not being able to pay. And what should happen is the probation officer should give them an application or something that they submit to the probation supervisor that will allow that person to waive their supervision fees and CRO drug testing fees. But like I said, it's always better to have proof of their indigency, whether that's, an SSI letter or disability letter saying how much they receive a month, or just kind of an affidavit of substantial hardship that they fill out and get notarized.
Okay, so through the probation officer.
I have a question.
I have a question.
Well, go ahead, Robin.
I have two questions, actually. The first one is, you mentioned a fair trial fee that was part of the, in your example, the traffic ticket. And then you said that was to pay attorneys. And then you said, but they're passing the attorney's cost on to the defendant. So where does that money go if it's not paying attorneys, or is it just not enough?
That's something that's a good, you guys are full of great questions. But so generally when an appointed attorney passes on their costs to the court, they will get immediately paid by that fund, and then the court tries to recoup that from the criminal defendant. So the fund pays them first, and then the court tries to recoup that. But based on my understanding of the fund, I think I looked up the budget, and there's not enough to pay that. So there is, what happens when there's not enough in the state and the Fair Trial Tax Fund is the state has to appropriate funds from the general fund to cover the discrepancy or gap.
Do they have to, or do they should?
Well, that's a great question, because the state never earmarks money for that fund, but they, based on my understanding of the budget, are paying kind of millions of dollars into it every year because they have to under the statute.
Is there any money to pay the parole officers or probation officers that comes from the state, or does it all come from criminal defendants paying into the system?
That I don't know. I don't think that the probation supervision fees go directly to the probation or parole officers. And that's why they're able to be waived in some cases, but that's not something that I've looked into extensively.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome.
My question is, we're in front of the parole building here in Huntsville, asking the felons about would they like to restore their voting rights. And we had this one kid said, well, I just paid $19,000 in fee. And Robin looked up his information on the Court, and out of the $19,000 he paid in, the one fee of $600 was the one keeping him away from voting. Now, who decides where the money goes? Let's say his mom died and he inherited money from his mother, and he walks in with $19,000. Who decides what fees get paid?
Based on my understanding, fees go towards restitution first. But if you're charged interest, that $30% increase, then the DA will collect the interest before it goes to restitution. So
I was going to say that was for trafficking, I think, the one he's mentioning.
oh yeah, drug trafficking, those can be very, very expensive just because they have like the mandatory fees and costs that they assess. Yeah, those are tough cases for sure. But I'm not really sure who decides where it goes. You can always try to petition a court to kind of direct money to certain things first. But based on my understanding, it goes to restitution first. And if there's interest, it would go to the interest first and then restitution.
So anyone else who hasn't asked a question, this is your chance. Rod,
I have a question. I was a former municipal court clerk for almost 15 years. And so one of the things that, we pay in municipal court, we pay the indigent attorney directly. So none of our funds come from the state. And it makes a lot of the municipal clerks upset because we are a collection agency for the state. So we collect all of those fair trial and the Citizens Trust Fund, all of those fees get collected. And what my experience has been is that, you have your, local ordinances and stuff that have their own pretty much fines and, where they go. But for the most part, and as a municipality, you can kind of control that. Most municipalities don't have a whole bunch of local ordinance items that are different from the state.
Mhm.
But our main problem was the legislators would every year, it seemed like, increase, they would slip something in extra on court costs.
Yeah.
And so, then the municipal courts would get a bad rap because, we're charging people, but we don't have any control over the court costs. And so what I would say is, we need to make sure that we lobby the legislator when these fees and stuff come up, because they're not helping anybody. They're not helping the courts, because the defendants, when I first started in municipal court, you could pay a traffic ticket, a speeding ticket. It was basically, you sacrifice your lunch for a couple of days and it was a slap on the wrist. Now the fines and court costs, and my former municipality, their court costs were nowhere near those ones you posted. And I mean, people are having a hard time paying them, and we're getting a bad rap, but it's not us, it's the legislature that's putting these extra costs in. Like that DA fee, that is totally ridiculous. There's no reason why the district attorney needs to get funds from municipal courts, because they do nothing for us. The fees that go to the circuit judge and the circuit clerk, they do nothing for municipal court, but we're having to collect that in every single court cost. And so, I mean, it's getting to the point where the legislature is causing the indigency problem with municipal courts.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I totally agree with you. Municipal courts do get a bad rap for the amount that they're charging people, and a lot of people don't understand that it's beyond their control. And I know that clerks are generally kind of exasperated with how many checks they have to write to all of these different funds at the end of the month, and it's a lot of paperwork. So yeah, I think that's very true.
So Laura, you had mentioned this is a part of a grant that you're doing with the SPLC. Could you just kind of talk about, I mean, what's the plan? Are you trying to get information to be able to make a difference or make changes in specific laws, or what?
I think that was kind of the goal of the grant, and I don't want to speak for SPLC, but they have done a lot of great work all over the state with keeping people from being incarcerated if they're too poor to pay. And they did a lot of good work with private probation systems in the state. And so in the course of doing that work, they realized that it would, well, I don't want to speak for them, but I can just say what I think they were thinking, is that it's just good to have someone on the ground in a statewide position going to all these courts and reporting back on things that they see, and making sure that in courts where they might have had done some work before, kind of make sure those courts are still keeping up that work that they need to do. So it is sort of kind of a way to let them know what's going on, to have somebody on the ground.
Well, this has been really educational. I appreciate your spending your time talking to us about the fines and fees and what's happening in Alabama.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. And like I said, these are the best questions I've ever had.
Well, hey, we are definitely able to ask good questions. We do a lot of work, but it's really, we need to learn all we can so that we can do what we do better. And I appreciate it.
Well, you're doing good work, so.
Thank you. And you are too. Thank you. And I guess I'm going to turn off the live stream, and then we can